Hi, I'm Kyla Steenhardt, and this is my colleague Nanette Meister. We're from iGraduate, a market research consultancy. We're based in the UK, but we work in around 35 countries around the world. And iGraduate specialises in research, particularly benchmarking in the education sector. iGraduate administers the CERU survey to CERU International Consortium members on behalf of the Centre for Studies in Higher Education at UC Berkeley. We're best known, though, for the International Student Barometer, which is a large global survey that looks at the decision-making and experience of international students around the world. The International Student Barometer has been running since 2005, and over that time has captured the views of over 3 million international students. We're really pleased to be able to contribute some results from recent years of the International Student Barometer to this discussion around student well-being. The importance of student well-being is undisputable, and its importance to universities has been highlighted in requests from our International Student Barometer universities in recent years to introduce some more questions around this topic in the barometer. And it's this data, along with some other key questions from the barometer, that we'll be sharing with you today. So over to you, Nanette.
Okay, thanks very much, Kyla. And I'm going to take you through some of the data from the International Student Barometer. Not surprisingly, if we look at happiness, overall, how happy are you with your life at university, and then the university name, we see 2017, 91% happy, 2018, 91% happy, 2019, 91% happy, and there the pandemic hit. And yes, it fell to a low, but I would say that's not really surprisingly, because what drives student happiness? This is data from the height of the pandemic 2020. And what you can see, it's things like making contacts for the future, opportunities to experience the culture, social facilities, social events, all the things that, well, due to the pandemic, were very difficult for students to experience because they required face-to-face contact and experience other people and other cultures. Quite difficult, of course, in that moment in time. The good news, though, is that what we see right now is it's bouncing back. We're not there yet, but we're also not entirely out of the pandemic, but things are moving up again. And let's look a little bit deeper into it, because it's interesting. If we look at undergraduate or postgraduate taught or postgraduate research students, we see a little bit of difference there. Not much, but a little bit. But we also see differences by nationality. The Chinese being happy or very happy, 90%. The American students down to the bottom, 83%. So interesting differences there. And we think it may be to do with cultures being able to do differently with hardship, with unexpected things. So yes, there may be some things here, but it's more speculative, of course. If we look at an area that we have been looking at more lately, more recently, we've been looking at discrimination and happiness. We will dive more deeper into the data. We're doing that, in fact, as we speak. So I can't share that with you yet, but not surprisingly, if you have experienced discrimination, whether it's nationality, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, disabilities, race or ethnicity, if you've experienced discrimination of any sort, you're less likely to be happy. Not unsurprisingly, but something that's worthwhile to pay a little bit more detail to. We've also looked at stress and anxiety and the percentage of international students globally feeling always or quite often stressed or anxious. We've also asked them, do you feel often stressed? And some people said, no, never. But let's look at the data. And Kyla and I were talking about this earlier on, and we thought it was interesting to see because, for instance, yesterday on the 8 o'clock news in my home country, the Netherlands, young people were being mentioned on the 8 o'clock news as people that suffered very much from particularly the last big lockdown that we had in our country. And I've been involved in another piece of research, Erasmus Plus projects, 2 of them. One was called Erasmus Skills, where we looked at the skills that students pre and post mobility mention. And the next survey that I was involved in, next Erasmus Plus project, was Erasmus Jobs. And there we asked employers to give their view. And what we noticed in Erasmus Skills, that students that go abroad apparently have already more of those coping skills that are more resilient and more open to experience other things. And when we asked the employers, it was exactly this what the employer said they're looking for when they hire a person. And the international study experience is, according to the employers, a useful thing, particularly for those scoping skills. So we thought maybe that's why international students display slightly less levels than, well, regular students, those who've not gone abroad. If we look at the stress and anxiety of those, looking at the study mode, so have you been staying, were you planning to go abroad, but did you not make it to the host country, or all the way to the right part of the slide, no studies were moved online. And apparently there was more stress and anxiety for those who studied entirely online. Again, something that you might not find surprising, but here's data that proves it, and data that helps you to underline and take action in that area. So maybe we do need some face-to-face contact to feel happy. Nice thing to know that human beings like contact with other human beings, always good to understand. If we look at stress and anxiety and always feeling stressed, there's differences between the levels of study, with the undergraduate being more stressed than the postgraduate taught in the postgraduate research, and maybe bachelor level students with less experience in life feel easier, more stressed than those with a little bit more life experience. We've also looked at the level of stress, and we did a deep dive into the data to look at the various nationalities. The Americans, more stressed, the Nigerians, the least stressed. So that's interesting again to look at cultures and cultural differences. Is it because some cultures will not say they're stressed, or is it cultures that are more experienced to stress anyway? All speculative, but nice to look at. And for an institution that gets the data for their student cohort, important to understand how they can deal with their cultural makeup of their students. If we look at concerns of completing the studies, that's seen an increase. Not really surprising, but while there was a sharp increase in stress and anxiety, it's not that big a change, 8% pre-pandemic to during the pandemic, and it's still going up. It's not going down. So that is an important one to realize, and something that universities do have to take action on. The whole part about counseling, I'll come back to that in a later end, because it's an important area. If we look at those concerns about completing your studies, it's much higher for students that have not set foot on the ground of their host country. So those that were planning to go to a particular country and were not able to get to that country, they have their biggest worries about completing their studies, which is not surprising, of course, but important again for institutions to realize and be able to take action on. If we look at the different regions, and I know it's frustrating when you see region 1, region 2, and region 3, but we don't want to name and shame those regions that we have surveyed because we promised them that we won't. So that's what we will not do. But you also need to realize with slides like this that we administer survey at slightly different calendar times, but more importantly, it was at the same moment in the academic year, but the country's policies around the pandemic were very different for each particular region. So we do see that when there's more confined policies, when there's less travel possible, when it's more restricted, it causes for more concern about completing your studies. So you might start to guess now which region is which, but let's stop it there. If we talk about concerns about completing your studies and we look at the different levels, both Kyla and I were slightly surprised to see that the undergraduate were more concerned, whereas you would think if you're an undergraduate student, if you're a bachelor student, you can still continue in your educational career. So why are they so worried about completing their studies? Maybe is it because they don't have the study rhythm, the study friends where they can connect with even online. It might be less life experience, but this is all speculative, of course, but things that we've been asking ourselves. If we look at the counseling usage, and that's an interesting one because, well, let's first look at this. Globally, overall, 16%. When they were entirely online, 15% used it. When there's face-to-face, 16% used it. So maybe universities were doing a pretty good job to make everything available online, irrespective of the status of the studies for the student. If we looked at the use of counseling service by nationality, American students make more use of it, Nigerian students, German students, Malaysian students make less use of it. And I think that's, I work in Europe and in North America, and I do notice that the whole spoon feeding of international students is much more common for American students than it is, for instance, in Germany and in Europe as a whole. So that might be something that explains things there. 22% of international students globally felt that counseling service may be useful, but do not know how to access it. And that's a really interesting part, of course. If we move on, we do see that counseling satisfaction was more or less the same. Differences, though, according to nationality, pretty big. China, very satisfied. Nigeria, very satisfied. India, very satisfied. Malaysia, satisfied. US students, not very satisfied at all. So big variation per country. Now, if we look at the counseling satisfaction, I think one of the most important things that we noticed when we looked at the open comment is that there's not enough counseling made available. And that's interesting because Tribal, the parent company of iGraduate, also does a lot of financial benchmarking. And in the financial benchmarking surveys, we noticed that it has tripled, this expenditure on counseling has tripled over the last 6 years. Still, students say it's not enough that we're getting of it. The access to counseling is restricted. So a quick recap, it's very important to understand what drives student happiness. Yes, the impact of the pandemic is felt strongly, but we also see a quick rebound, so that's nice to know. Student well-being is important to students, but also to higher education institutions, because there's a clear link with recommending the institution. And the need for mental health support has increased. I think it's also a generational thing where this generation requires more mental support, but the access to and availability of counseling definitely needs to understand. And I think it's beneficial to understand the differences between the various groups. So yes, act on data insights is important here. And I hope all of you will be using the serial results to the max. And if you want to have a further discussion with either Kyla or myself, here are our contact details. Thank you for listening. Kyla and I are available for further questions, and looking forward to catching up with you.